The ACN podcast is made possible thanks to the generosity of our listeners and sponsors, including the Agile Alliance. As a nonprofit membership organization, the Agile Alliance is an excellent resource to help you along your Agile journey. To learn more about the Agile Alliance and our other sponsors, as well as how you can become a sponsor or supporter of our show, please visit acnpodcast.org for more information. And thank you for your support. Good morning and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Agile Coaching Network. This is episode 82, which is pretty cool. If this is your first time hearing this podcast, this is a conversation between all of us that are in the room, not just myself and the co-hosts that join me every month, and Shauna, Deanna, Georg, Sheila Eckhart, and Sheila McGrath are all here to get the conversation going. We're the conversation starters. The goal is to bring you all into the conversation as we go, as we talk about these different subjects we bring up on every episode. The goal is for you to go off and also contribute as well. We've got people who actually help support us, which we appreciate because the podcast system and other things cost out of pocket for us. We really thank all of the people who are the sponsor for us. So if you want to be a supporter as well, you're welcome to go up to acnpodcast.org and buy us a coffee. Or if you want to become a corporate sponsor of the organization, please go take a look over there. The other thing, just to make a quick shout out, because we're going to have several of our co-hosts, we're going to be at an event in Portland, Oregon. So we're going to be running a strategic agility lab. It's a 2-day leadership retreat. We invite you to go take a look at strategicagilitylab.org. It's 2 days where we're going to be talking about a lot of the things that we talk about on the ACN. So if you want to go and be there with us, Shauna and Deanna and myself will be there along with some other facilitators, but we're going to be talking everything around strategic agility for companies. We're welcome to have you there. To get everything started today, there's been a lot of posts over the last, and it seems to come in trends. It happens probably, I see it sometimes in January or as we approach maybe the big Agile conference that's coming up next week. But we get into this sort of rant that I see happening in our community, talking about something called the Agile Industrial Complex. Or if you think of it, and Matt Phillip posted an article that described it as referring this to an unhealthy relationship between consultancies, credential bodies, the ones who do your certifications, frameworks, and tool vendors. And really, if you look at the crux of this, if you think of the Agile Manifesto when it was originally created, a lot of what was a part of the core of Agile was about team empowerment, meaning that we're going to go practice Agile as a culture. That wasn't a discussion one way or another. We just decided that we're going to go move towards the Agile mindset and culture, but we didn't really define the method or the framework or other things before we got started. Part of my journey, and this was back at a Fortune 100 company, we chose to move towards it as a team. And it wasn't mandated. Yes, we had to go get sponsorship and we had to keep our customers in the know so that they didn't feel like we were somehow jeopardizing a release or jeopardizing the quality of the system or something else. But the relationships that we had with our tool vendors and consulting groups, that of need, meaning that there were things that we needed as a team and we sought out these particular companies. They didn't run our Agile adoption for us. We ran our own Agile adoption. If you think of what a lot of the different commentary that's around this industrial complex saying, or this particular notion around whether or not this is harmful, is really coming. And then Martin Fowler, one of the signatories of the Agile Manifesto, posted a blog post as well. And this was really one of the foundational components of when people were talking about this industrial complex, is that the imposing of processes on teams is, and he says that's completely opposite to what Agile software development was from its inception. And this top-down mandate, we are going to go do, I don't know, less safe. We're going to go do XYZ, whatever methodology that you're currently practicing today. The question is, how much say that did you have in that? And the question is this a real reality that people are dealing with today? And is this harmful to what we really intended, to what Agile is really about? And this question of the fact of obeying, you need to get certified. We're going to have a command and control structure that's not going to go away, meaning that the command and control that we had in the old organization is going to stay in place. And then we're going to be very hierarchical in the way that we approach things, and almost if you've ever heard fragile or agile waterfall, or agile falls or other things, these accommodations for old systems are going to remain in place. Now, the unhealthy relationship with the consultancies in particular that was called out in some of these blog posts was about the fact that if you look at Agile at its most basic form, that's really not something we can sell, or something that somebody would pay dollars to have a consultant come in. Consultants typically come in for a very brief period of time, get something done, and then they leave. The question is, it became more transactional as the consultancies came into existence, the tool vendors came into existence, and others. Is that also part of the problem as well that sort of feeds this notion of the Agile Industrial Complex? From a questions perspective, and I think, again, going back to my roots, we chose to move towards an Agile culture versus somebody choosing it for us and choosing a framework. We chose the framework. And the question of, did the team get buy-in or not when we're bringing it in? And all of the anti-patterns that can happen if the team is forced to do something. It could be disruptive to a lot of different things. And then the question of, when we pick a framework and we don't revise and adjust or modify, or even if it's not working for us, scrap it, because we're going to still remain agile. We just know that particular framework doesn't work for us. So the question to kick us off is, one, is the rants that we see on LinkedIn and Twitter and other things, is this just a myth, or is this an actual reality? Is it a big problem for us as an Agile community? And if it is, how large do you think it is? How large do you think this problem is, and how is it affecting the work that we're trying to do to deliver great customer outcomes? How does that impair it? And then the last one is, if it is really real, what steps can we take to fix the problem? Maybe pull back slightly from over-certifying people, or maybe the frameworks have become too much of an ingredient of recipe following versus we need more chefs in the kitchen. So with that, to kick this off, let's see. Shauna, did you want to take a dive at this?
I do think that there's a lot of push of process. I believe that the things that really help us embrace Agile are things like leaving room for curiosity, continuous learning. We talk a lot about innovation or embracing change. And I think that in order to leave room for that and setting up an environment for that, it's all about getting people together, talking. As soon as you help bring some frameworks forward, that opens up that curiosity. You can see organizations see, I want more of that, right? Can you help me understand some other frameworks that can bring some of this excitement and learning into our organization? And so there's a little bit of give and take that needs to happen to open up that curiosity and help teams learn and improve. And if that isn't happening and it's just do these processes, this is what makes us agile, it's no better than anything else that we're doing. And I think, unfortunately, there is a lot of drive for specifically delivering. Let's deliver faster. Let's scale faster. Everything's too complex, so everything has to be faster. I think Agile becomes the scapegoat for cutting out some of what's deemed as process or heavy things so that we can move faster. And you end up just running this race, and you don't end up leaving time for the things that really matter. And because of that, I do think that the industry has tried to adapt to all of these things in terms of delivering and moving faster. And I think where organizations really need to come back to figure out where they're missing the mark is, and we're seeing it right now. I think there's a lot as we're seeing things like generative AI come in, and companies are scrambling. They're saying, how do we create these pockets or areas of innovation? How do we adapt to some of the things that are happening? And they're really struggling. And so when we look at industrial complex, I do think it has become a rather large problem because we're focusing on the wrong things in the industry a lot of times. It's just we're focusing, like I said, primarily on speed and delivery instead of on the other pieces.
And just to expand a little bit on what you were saying there, but is this a question of that the ask is about speed and delivery, getting it delivered on time, or if you look at from predictability standpoint, which are two qualities that we do see, and a lot of the sales pitches are around that. Do you think it's just because of the way that it's being sold right now?
Yeah. And look, I know that a lot of companies are trying to there is this race to market. And so I understand that. I just think that we've leaned too heavily on that side, which has created this entire ecosystem around we can help you deliver as fast as you possibly want to go. Yeah, in some ways it has been good in terms of productivity, but in other ways it's just cut out the conversation completely.
So Deanna, if you think about, and I think we had a conversation a long time ago, and this was when early days of Agile that we were working when I was over at Intel and you came in and gave us some help. One of the key things I thought of, if the one thing that I could get out of Agile was happier people and retaining them, that was good enough for me, because that's what we wanted to change. We wanted to get off the death mill of delivering products sometimes as it felt. So I'm curious what you think about the industrial complex, and do you think we're focused on the wrong measurement points?
It's an interesting problem, and you have to step carefully. I do not want to offend too many of my colleagues, and not my colleague panelists, but my colleagues in the Agile community writ large, and particularly the Agile consulting community writ large, and I'm one of them. Some of it, I think, has to do with the customers only can ask for what they understand and know how to ask for. And I think part of this idea of the Agile Industrial Complex has come from the fact that too many consultants are in a position where they either just got a certification, or the certification is pretty fresh, or they're desperate for work, or one thing or another. And any of these certifications, doesn't matter where you're getting them from, if you've gone through a 2-day or 3 2-day programs, or whatever it is that it takes to get the certification, you're not, that doesn't necessarily prepare you to be a consultant to a large organization. And it may help you understand the framework, but it doesn't help you necessarily what to do next. And I think too much of the time, because of wanting the work or because of whatever else is going on in people's lives, they are willing to say, oh yeah, I'll give you that. That's Agile. I'll show you how that works. It's okay. And then, or I've even had colleagues tell me, I just use my certification in XYZ to get my foot in the door. And then I'm going to show them how Agile really works. Except it's really hard, even once you're in the door, to show them how Agile really works, if that's not what they thought they were buying in the first place. I think there's a lot of pieces to this, and a lot of ownership of what has caused this reality of the Agile Industrial Complex, which isn't Agile. And now a lot of folks are saying, oh, we're not going to talk about Agile. Now we're going to talk about agility. And oh, that's so much different. And if you're not communicating to the people you're working with that what you are bringing to them is I want to say the truth, but no, the fundamentals, and that we're going to work from those fundamentals, then what Martin's quote is very accurate, that what's being sold and what's being implemented in organizations and what leaders in organizations are saying when they're saying, oh yeah, we're agile now, and HR can put agile in their job descriptions when they're recruiting, is not a good representative of what was intended as agile in the beginning, which had a lot more to do with flexibility and teams who were understood their own work and understood it well enough to know what work process design was going to work best for them and how that matches up with the various methodologies. And as companies and organizations grow larger and larger, the demand for standardization so that people can just understand what's going on becomes greater. And of course, standardization flies in the face of flexibility and teams having different kinds of products to work on and needing to do different kinds of work. It's a tough problem. And Shauna said she's begun to hear things. I've been very, what do I want to say, encouraged by the fact that I'm hearing more and more people talking about, let's stay away from the frameworks. Let's look for the agnostic agile. Let's go back to the beginning and see how this was intended to create real change and difference and improvement in our product and in the way we work, in all kinds of things. The Agile Manifesto was intended to make life better for developers, if you think about the very first part of it. And that's not what's happened. I guess that argues for the Agile Industrial Complex being a reality and not what Agile is really intended to represent. It's not the way I work, but it's the way some folks work.
Thank you for that. That depresses me a little bit. Jorg, you and I, I'm going to invoke Intel again here. When we worked at Intel, one of the core, tenets of what we were trying to go do was focused on people. And instead of mandating, we created a very large community of practice, and we kept feeding ideas into the community of practice, and they were like taking those ideas and implementing them. Do you think that the part of this is that the focus point has become too framework centric and not people centric?
I'm not even sure that it's that one directional. I think there are still a lot of people, and definitely including consultants, that do the thing based on the manifesto and the values and wanting to make life better for the people, and they actually honestly and actively work towards this. So it's not like everything is going down to just larger frameworks, more certifications and everything. So I still believe there's a lot of energy left in the other way of working, because once you've seen it really make a team better, and once you've been part of a team that gets better, and together you feel these kinds of success, you will notice that the other formal stuff is maybe containing a good idea, but overall it's just too much burden. Once you've learned it, I don't think any kind of industrial complex will make you unlearn it easily. And I think it's more about security and getting your own problems addressed that allows this to drive. Because if I pay a lot of money for certification, have it in writing, then it's safety. The safety of just having it and not even having to maybe invest in changing myself. So it's highly attractive for a lot of managers. It's highly attractive for a lot of layers that are very far away from what they still maybe perceive as a software thing. What is really the counterweight is people together making their lives better and going to new ideas. And I've never so far, hopefully at least, mandated something, but I've been very often asked, what would you recommend? Tell us how we should start, because we simply don't know. And we shouldn't confuse this, that not knowing and asking for a start on the path, which is very concrete and maybe giving a lot of answers that people want to have concrete in the beginning, this is not a bad thing. And in that, I believe that there's still room for the good things. But I don't personally really feel so exposed to the other side, but I've been sales pitched to a lot of stuff where it's immediately visible that I know how you make money, but I don't know really what you're going to offer me. But I've as well met a lot of different people who approach this with another way.
Sure. Would you say that was because of your upbringing in Agile that did that? Or do you think that, that in your position in your company right now, you happen to be a person that is core to the movement and therefore the movement takes its form from you as the change agent?
Yeah, probably both. So definitely one thing that a bit as well insulated me against this need for certifications and titles and everything was that I spent my first 15 years before we met already in a company that didn't value titles and they didn't care much about hierarchy. So their hierarchy principle always was your manager is there to help you long before Agile. And so it was pretty easy to open the doors and get exposed. And then luckily I could continue that journey and learn much more about as well facts and theory, because that needs to go together. It's not just experiencing it, it's as well understanding what is intended and how that works or doesn't work to get better. And this definitely empowered me to transmit this again to other people and get the movement going, actually more or less regardless of expectations, just making visible what is achieved in the team and making their team success visible, which is always a strong message. And actually, I can tell you from personal experience, within a very limited time frame, applying this openness and getting the teams to act on themselves can have a big impact on an organization. It's just a hard sales pitch for people who don't listen to their staff. Then it really doesn't work.
Interesting. So in not to just dig a little bit deeper, because I think your culture in Germany sometimes is perceived as being very order centric, chief engineering people, yep. Those, strong hierarchy from that perspective. I'm curious on steps that we can do to fix the problem. I think, would you consider yourself a unique thing in Germany, or is this something that is just taking off as an idea, the way that you think about this?
I think a lot of people like it. And there's actually one thing in our culture that makes it more possible to do this, because even though we're hierarchical on decision making, we somehow still seek agreement. And that is not as much top down as the other structures would suggest. So we're quite strange on that. The Japanese are slightly more strange on that. They have hierarchy and need agreement. So, but that is actually what picks our two cultures out a bit from everybody else. But I understand that the basic motivations of people are pretty much identical, no matter what culture is on top. If they can make an impact, if they are visible and recognized, and if they're part of a team, we're just social beings, that always makes a difference. And I believe that people who see this and get this understanding, no matter what culture is on top, will translate that in a useful way. And I believe this is happening all over the place. I've met a lot of German managers who actually often have the challenge that they've been raised and educated in a different way. Like one of R&D heads that I worked with, he said, I want this, I understand it. I actually can feel it, but once I'm in a stressful situation, I reflexively go back to command and control. And the only thing I can do is tell this to everybody and just be open. I can't kill that reflex. And that made him extremely powerful, even following this culture of hierarchy, command and control, and feeling like he must be in control, but acknowledging this opened up the chance for people to make offers to him, like, we can give you control back by telling you you don't need to take it, and things like that. And for him, this was just giving so much personal breathing space And again, if people have felt it, that trust actually begets results and support on most of the time. Going back is just extremely hard, no matter where you come from.
That's pretty amazing. Thank you for sharing that story. Karen actually put into the question box, how do you sell curiosity? And if part of it is about curiosity, how do we sell that? But anyway, go ahead, Sheila.
There's been a lot of good things that have been said here. And I do think that a lot of organizations and consulting groups are looking at, we want to move from one process to another process, or we're going to move your organization from your current process to this, quote, agile process. And I do think that is something that the organizations often are asking for. And they have an idea that doing a full blown, okay, everybody's going to use this brand new process, there's some ease to that. There's a benefit of that consistency throughout the organization. Here are the best practices that you should be adhering to. And we're going to be able to measure you on that because this is what we're told makes you most agile. But oftentimes what I see is that actually sometimes becomes an impediment unless you're looking at it the way Shauna was saying, which is, I'm going to use one of my favorite things, which is Shuha-Ri. And if you're bringing in this process, because it is easy to move from one process to another process and not as easy to say, we're going to do away with process and we're going to let you pick and choose process. You get into that whole Shuha-Ri where you're taking that process, you're using the rules. But the important thing is not to get stuck in that state, right? Because what I have seen is sometimes you get stuck in that state, you implement the rules and you stay in the rules. But the idea is that improvement, right? The idea is to go through and say, okay, I've put in this framework, we're following the rules, but now we have to do that really important part of inspection and adaptation and go to the ha part and be, okay, where do we need to break the rules in order to achieve higher levels, sorry, Diana, of agility? I think that's the important component of it. I do think that it is a reality, but that reality can lead to, as Shauna was saying, where you get to that better state, to that better sense of being agile. I think then if you could actually get to the restate and define your own rules that work, which is what you were saying that you were doing, that's where, yeah, that is great. If teams can do that, if an organization can do that, and I think that does still happen, but yeah, that's my take on it. I do think that's where if you are a consulting company or you're an individual consultant, this is where you could lead in that evolution, right? And see that whole agile process of being evolutionary and not just we're transformed and it's done. And that's part of what agile is all about. Let's look at it, inspect it, let's experiment with the change. And as long as that's happening, then possibly the industrial complex is not 100% a bad thing.
You're a consultant by day.
I am.
And so with that, and I could tell you from my own consulting background, I use the stance of when somebody says, I want this, I dig into the question, why do they feel that they need it? And then try to educate what the pluses and minuses or any of this stuff is versus just saying, I can do that for you. There's a lot of, with most of the methods, there's some of them just don't fit. I'm just curious from your standpoint as you approach these conversations, because how do you create a healthy relationship?
I'm working with something very similar to that right now at the team level, right? Because at the team level, what fits for some of the teams is not fitting with these two teams that have a different dynamic, a different set of work that they need to do. So at that point, it is really important, as you said, to push back and say, this doesn't really fit into that whole process that you want in place. So we need to look at how this will work in a way that satisfies the needs of the organization, but also the needs of the team in order for them to be at their best and not be floundering. There's a balance, right? If you have an organization at the high level that's saying, oh, we want to implement this very popular framework, there's sometimes not much that a consultant or consulting company can do to move the needle on that. But what you can do is to try to customize that a little bit once you have deeper knowledge of how everything works beneath that level.
Okay. Thank you for that. Sheila McGrath, what do you have on this?
The first thing is, I think management is generally going to be risk averse pretty much constantly. So they're looking for it to be a standard formula. And they implement a tool and they want management reporting to roll up in a standard way. And therefore they configure the tool, or someone configures the tool so that everything must be done in a standard way, which takes away a lot of the team's ability to be self-directed. The other piece is, if they're only implementing Agile within IT or within a subset of the company, if the whole organization isn't going Agile, then there's always a dichotomy between what's happening within the part that is Agile and the part that isn't, because your accounting, your funding is coming from outside in a lot of cases. And they're still looking at everything from a waterfall perspective because that's what they're familiar with. So you wind up having to translate things back and forth. So now you've got standard reporting and having to translate back and forth. And then maybe management goes to a class or watches some videos and they get the terminology, but they don't really get the concept of servant leadership, because that's a much harder thing to get. But they've got the right names for things. They know what the meetings are supposed to be called, whatever framework they're using, and they know what the title should be, however they want to organize them. So they give everybody the right titles and they call the meetings by the right names. And they think they're Agile. But the teams may not get any training. It may not be something that they really know. Even if they learned about Agile in the past, it's implemented a little differently at every company anyway. So they're put into roles that they just change their title and they don't really know how it's any different. They don't really understand the interactions. A lot of times you find that they don't really understand that the business does not exist so that IT can have fancy bells and whistles. IT exists to help the business to produce something to delight the customer. Another thing that happens is that management thinks, in a lot of cases, I've seen this in more than one company, that the teams need training and coaching, but they don't think they need any. I don't know why this happens, that they want to implement a whole new, they're trying to change a mindset, but they don't think their minds are some of the ones that needs to change. So you wind up with them still doing command and control, but saying, you will follow this Agile framework and you will do it exactly, consistently on every single project, on every single product. And they don't understand that's the antithesis of what Agile was intended to do. So they think they're doing it. And then the real danger, though, is that when they're implementing it in this way, where they're paying lip service, but they're not really understanding the philosophy and the underlying concepts, after a while, and depending on the company, it may be a short while or a long while, but after a while, they're going to say, Agile didn't really work for us, because they think they've been doing it. And then they want to move on to the next shiny new object, whatever it is. And they've really never been agile, but they don't even know that. And I've seen that happen in more than one company that I've worked with. Different flavors in each one. And some of them did actually send people for training. But the other thing is then you get into, and I think the fact that for government contracts, I believe people have to have certifications and they have to specify which ones in the contract. So if someone doesn't have the right current certifications, they can't be on the project. But the fact that the person has that certification just means that they took a few days to get the certification. I mean, there's some of them that take a lot longer, but for a lot of what they're looking for, it's the very basic ones. So it's something that somebody can get within a few days, which is not long enough for them to have, unless they already have a servant leader mindset, it's not long enough for them to have gotten to where they even understand what that is. So how can they impart it to anybody else when they don't really understand it themselves?
Katie just posted a question. She said that is part about being agile if not everyone is committing to the mindset to scale that across the entire organization. Does that mean that if you have, say, a subculture of IT, is that a bad thing? Or is that something that just says that agile will only work in the one little enclave that's out there? It doesn't work outside.
I've done things that were agile concepts where there were no systems involved, where it was focusing on process and policy. But I didn't tell them it was agile because they didn't think they liked agile. I've done that more than once in different companies. But IT will usually buy into it. Other parts of the organization, I think, are starting to say that they need to be more agile, more responsive, in the sense of more responsive to the customer. And they see agile frameworks as a way to be more responsive. But I don't think it's a one size fits all anyway. In my mind, if it's usually a combination that you need, it's not, there's more than one way to be agile. And for certain things, you're better off with Kanban than with some of the other methods. Like if you're doing something with hardware and infrastructure, you can't always predict when the hardware is going to be available. If you're dealing with something really old, but you need to interface with something that's waterfall, maybe it's better to leave that waterfall. Because in my mind, a lot of the really old systems are like turning a battleship. They're not going to turn very fast. And if you're trying to fit them into the way things work, when you're talking about some of the newer technologies, the considerations are so totally different, it may not be the best fit. But that's the thing. That's the problem with having everything has to be cookie cutter, one size fits all, so that it can roll up into a nice, neat management report that isn't necessarily going to tell them anything meaningful because they've sanitized it so much that it's not really telling them what's going on in the individual efforts on the individual teams. The team shouldn't have to do everything the same way or do everything the same way from one release to the next. And then another thing I've seen in relation to that is when they make everything so cookie cutter, they tend to move people around sometimes too much, because every time you have a change in the team has to reform. And if you're moving people around every 2 or 3 months, which I've seen in a number of companies, and I think it's pretty common, there is no standard. You don't have time to get to a team where they have confidence in each other and they can move toward a goal as a team. I'm not sure if I wandered off the question or not. But to me, it's not just IT. That's part of the problem, is when people see it as just IT.
Okay. And I think subcultures happen in all companies. I think there was a long time ago, I think it was for one of our annual celebrations of our been in existence for 25 years or what it was, they produced a comic book that had all the different subcultures of what would take place. And we had a team over in Folsom, California, and they made a parody about what the culture was there, and then the culture over in Santa Clara and the culture in Arizona. So there's always going to be cultural components to it. And curious as we start to wind down, if you think about base cultures and effect of agile adoptions, and the term of little a agile and big A agile, which it seems to have now been reversed. I think big A agile is being related now to the industrial complex, and little a agile is the people who are just trying to be agile now, which is interesting. I used to use it in reverse, kind of considering flipping it. If anyone wants to take a stab again on what are ways that we can back our way out of this, if this is where we're at as the state of the industry, is it just happen one person at a time, one community at a time?
I think it does have to do with those folks, those of us, I want to say, who are devoted to that original idea of creating awesome organizations where people are doing great work and customers are feeling thrilled about it, and whether they're internal or external customers. If we're looking for creating that, and we really that is the world that we want to create, be the change you want to see in the world, you look at what people are calling the Agile Industrial Complex, and you look at what do you think is going to be more effective than that, and which is, anyway. And so I think things like getting together at the big Agile conference and having these conversations and talking about how can we move the needle in a different direction, and what are some techniques for if we find ourselves in that situation inside it's much more a problem, I find, the larger the organization is. And it's one of the reasons that I tend to work with smaller organizations. And Jorg is right. Once somebody has experienced working on the kind of team that Agile is, or in the kind of organization that Agile is intended to create, they never want to go back. And they are always trying to recreate that if they lose it. And at least it's been my experience. And it may not, societal change doesn't happen in 10 years or 15 years or even 20 years. So we have to stay the course and give more and more people the opportunity to have that experience of being on a really satisfying team, doing really wonderful work, then feeling the appreciation from our customers. And then more and more of us will only be satisfied with that work. And I think that may be a generational change and not just a marketing cycle of 20 years. So that's my plan, is to just keep doing what I know feels right and that people appreciate, and not worry so much about what's going on in the huge organizations that need all this standardization because they're just too unwieldy to actually work any other way.
Thank you for that. And Sheila, you had something as well?
Diana said a lot of what I was thinking on there, but there's one other thing that came to mind when I first saw the steps to fix the problem. And this is one of those small things, big impact. And I've been trying to do this, and I've noticed the impact, and it may seem silly, but I have been very consciously making sure that the term best practices gets replaced, because I feel that
once you start cheering in the background,
once you start doing that, and I hear it so often, best practices, these are the best practices. And the best practices for one is not the best practices for the other. But sometimes those common practices are proven things that have been proven to work. So I tend to make sure that I am always saying there are some good practices that people have come up with. There are some good practices out there. There are some common practices that have worked for others that we could experiment with, as opposed to just letting somebody say, can you tell me what the best practices are? That's a very common thing that I hear. What are the best practices? And I have to always make sure that I'm coming back with, I wouldn't call them best practices because of what I just said. And little thing, big impact.
Fully agree with that. I think a lot of companies get hung up on best known methods. And I remember they would have databases full of these things. This is the method. I think the other thing too, the question between a policy, thou shalt, and this is the hard boundary set versus the guidelines. The whole construct of the 12 principles are guidelines for us. And they're heuristics in the system, the rules of thumb as we approach it. And rules of thumbs don't always guarantee the output we expected. In fact, they might go completely the different direction at times. And I think sometimes we have to remember that, especially in the complexity of product design and product development, we are always going to see a big surprise. And I relate this back to my days of doing quality, doing validation work, and that we would invest millions of dollars in trying to making sure we have the most high quality product that we expect and living up to whatever the requirement was. And I could tell you that every time a defect would come and get filed against it, I would just be so fascinated about how that happened, because no one thought that was going to take place. The complexities of market will always impact that. I'd like to thank everyone for this session. I think that this was great. I want to remind everyone that you have an opportunity next week if you're at the Big Agile Conference down over in Orlando. I'm going to be there. I've got a session on Thursday. I'm going to be talking about communities of practice. And Deanna, you're there too. What are you talking about?
I'm doing a workshop on Wednesday afternoon with Tricia Broderick, and we're talking about learning in organizations and leadership. And then on Thursday, I've got a panel it's called Not Your Usual Retrospective Panel or something.
Cool. And correct me if I'm wrong, you've got a new version of your book that's going to get released.
Actually, yeah, the second edition of the Agile Retrospectives book, the beta for it is coming out on Tuesday. And so we'll have check in with Esther Derby or me or David Horowitz, and we'll have information about if you want to participate in that beta process and get your hands on the book a little sooner. That will be available next week.
Exciting. Sheila, what do you have?
Oh, I was just going to say that you and I are competing in time slots at the Agile Alliance, because I am at the same time as you are on Thursday, assisting in a dramatizing customer journeys.
Awesome. Still competing.
So, competing.
Are you competing against me or?
I wish I could come to yours too. It's one of the big problems with the conferences. There are so many things I want to go to at the same time.
Still, that's what kind of makes it fun. I have that session on Thursday, and other than that, I think they have Open Jam again. I'll probably be hanging out mostly around that area in space. If anyone wants to look me up, be sure to you all have my email. So you can email me and we can sync up. I would love to have a conversation with you live, which would be incredibly cool. And until that time, I want to wish you all a happy month. And as we wind down, at least here in this hemisphere of the summer, I hope you have a good remainder of the summer left. And for those of you who are in the other part of the season, I hope you're having a wonderful season as well. With that, take care, and I will see you next month. The ACN podcast is for educational and informative use only. If you'd like to know more about the ACN community, please come up to acnpodcast.org and support our show.